Awesome sauce. So I am here today with a rare gem in the tech world. This is someone who can actually speak both tech and human, which, as some of you may know, can be a really rare combination. So we're
This is
super
someone
excited to
who
have
can
with us
actually
today
speak both tech.
is Nick Turner, who's having some tech pop up on him, which is super awesome. So exciting. So Nick is going to talk to us today. He is currently a student inside the Joy of Coding Academy, and his experience is really unique, as all of our students are, but Nick in particular, because he came in with some pretty awesome skills. And he really wanted to help dive in and explore who he could really be. And we created a custom internship for him where he got to start and launch a project from scratch, end to end, start to finish, grow the team, right? So he managed the tech, he managed the team, he did it amazingly, like a total self-starter, total class act, like cannot say a bad thing about Nick. Like he just like if you need someone on your team or you need technical expertise, like he is your guy. Like I couldn't speak more highly of him. And I'm just super excited, Nick, to have you here today so we can kind of dive into like who you are, what the dream is, and if you have any advice for, other developers that are coming behind you. And so I'd love, Nick, if you could just start with a moment, just to tell us a little bit more about yourself, like introduce yourself, like, what's the dream look like for you?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the kind words. I've been actually in the tech industry for over a decade now. I've been a program manager at large companies. Actually started off a Scrum Master, became a program manager. I was the product manager for eBay's internal innovation programs. So that was a fun role. I've had head of operations and head of engineering roles at Series A and seed levels venture-backed startups. So I've kind of run the gamut as far as company size, stage. They all have different challenges and what needs to get done. My biggest, I think, thing was that I was very much self-taught as a developer. So I kind of had a lot of imposter syndrome. I wasn't really sure if I kind of belonged on the technical side, even though I was able to hold my own. So this program's been really great for helping to fill in those gaps, specifically around like data structures and algorithms and Big O, the kind of things that you don't always go over when you're self-taught. I love the program's approach to everything, how we were able to go through also like stacks and queues, and you're going through kind of this low-level CPU stuff, but you're doing it in a way that's very accessible. So that's all been great. And the way that kind of feeds into my long-term goals is I really just wanted to build up my technical chops since I've done a little bit of like leadership and management side of things. My last role was actually helping take a seed level startup from their MVP, get them productionalized and get them launched. So that was all based on like previous experience at other startups and launching things internally at eBay. But as far as getting my hands dirty myself, I kind of had limited experience. So I was working with a team of developers, but this has really given me the opportunity to now build out this AI chatbot, which has been great. So it's been one of the biggest projects that I've done as a technical lead. So actually going through the architecture, building it out, leading and mentoring the team, making sure everybody's set up and can contribute, all of that. So it's been great to kind of bring all of that together. And that's what I'm looking forward to continuing in, being sort of either like a senior IC or more of like a junior level manager, because the last few startups, I just want to make sure that there's strong alignment with who I'm working with, especially in the management level, and kind of grow my career from there. But I really like working, like you said, with people and with computers. So I love these roles where I can kind of do, half my time doing one and half my time doing the other.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing, Nick. And that's so cool that you like had this breadth of experience, but you hadn't really had like that low level technical expertise and being self-taught. It's hard to know on the outside, like, what gaps to fill. So were you seeing that, Nick, as you were applying for jobs on the job market? You're like, you weren't sure where the gap was. And so you're like, okay, maybe it's this, maybe it's tech, and let me dive in and plug that hole. Was that your thinking when you first signed up? I'm just curious.
Definitely. And there's a whole culture of people who just crank through leak code and hacker rank, but some people say that's really useful. Some people say it's not needed. Data structures is a really deep rabbit hole, right? Each individual data structure can be a rabbit hole on its own. So it's like, yeah, when is enough? How do you know? How do you know what you need to know to solve problems? And that's why I kind of really like the approach as well. It's very generalized. The 7 steps, right? You're able to kind of decompose and break down any problem, communicate it well. And I think that was also another sort of barrier, just being able to break down the technical details and communicate them clearly.
Yeah, awesome. That's so good. So like I think what I hear you saying, Nick, is that it's also knowing when to stop learning, right? Like it's like which way do you go? And then how do you know when enough is enough? Like what is that stopping criteria? And so that's really great feedback that you really found that, you know, with the materials that we do inside the Joy of Coding Academy, because we really were intentional. I took this very seriously as a professor, just to go on a slight tangent, because I shifted jobs and I became I switched positions from universities to become like the chair. It was the program director of computer science, and I thought very deeply at the time. I was like, "There's YouTube, there's Udemy, right? There's so much content out there. What can I provide as a professor? What does the program need to provide to equip our students for successful careers, knowing that technology is ever changing, and right, and the skills you'll be required to know hands-on are going to be, you know, evolving. What is that core set? So we've really, you know, imbued that in our setup. And so it's so great to have that feedback. Thank you, Nick, that like this was hitting the right notes for you, because you're right, data structures can be a total rabbit hole. But like at the end of the day, there, you know, once you understand some of the basics, right, you can go get that learning if you need it, right? And that's really what we're about, is, and which you've executed so well, is knowing when to stop learning, kind of get in that direction and going deeper. So super awesome. I love it. I love it. And if anyone's tuning in live, please don't hesitate to drop any questions for Nick in the chat. Awesome. Rick is really loving it. Thank you so much, Rick. It's great to listen on those and valuable insights to share. So awesome, Rick. Thanks for being here. And again, anyone, if you have live, you know, questions, Nick and I are happy to answer them. So Nick, I'd love to dive in more about, like, you know, who you are and what drew you to tech in the first place. So, you know, can you share with us just briefly what inspired you to learn how to code and like get into tech in the first place?
Yeah, so I've always kind of been innately curious, like kind of interested in how things work. And I think like to that, like it's easy to over engineer things. So I think that's probably why the rabbit holes can be sometimes too enticing. You go far down the wrong rabbit holes and then you kind of lose the big picture. But I've always been that type. Like I'll get interested in something, I'll deep dive into it, sometimes learn too much, more than I need to know sometimes. But yeah, I've always just been kind of a curious person. And early on, it was just a bit more of a steeper learning curve, because when I was learning, everything was C and you had to do memory management. It wasn't quite assembly, but it was still like you are doing, you know, allocating memory just for Hello World. So it made that bit of the learning curve a little bit steeper. Then Python came out, so that made it a little bit more accessible. So I was able to kind of solve my own problems. So at HP or Snapfish, I noticed one of my developers was spending a lot of time troubleshooting something. And part of the problem was when you're in a large corporate environment, it's often heavily siloed. So people don't even really, they're not even incentivized to, you know, look into each other's code all the time. So by working with various teams, I put together Python scripts that used internal APIs that was able to free up this person's time so that they can work on new field development, which was much more valuable to the company than solving this issue, which was still, I believe, a 6-figure issue. But having this manual process was just really inefficient. So that was kind of like my first, oh, I can actually, you know, solve a problem. And I do like that tech scales, right? You write it once and doesn't matter if one person uses it or 1,000 people use it or 1 million people use it. It scales very well. So I also like that. Like you can solve the problem once and then move on to the next problem. So that's kind of what got me into it. Then at eBay, on that internal team, I was actually, since it was a small team, I actually did some of the coding. So that was an Angular framework with a Node backend. The 2 engineers on the team basically modified Angular to work with eBay's internal systems. And then I just did some of the product level coding. And then, from there I did help that startup get operationalized just based on my experience. So that's been kind of my journey through learning to code. And this program has been great in, filling in all the lower level gaps. And again, this AI project, it's been the biggest thing I've written, and it's been a joy.
That's awesome. So good. Thanks so much, Nick. And oh my goodness, I just want to take a moment to highlight just how unusual that is. That you were able, when you're on that team with Snapfish and HP, you're able to recognize like there's this low value task, this really like this highly compensated developer is doing that could be replaced by coding, and that you actually recognized it, were able to implement a solution, right? Like it just sounds like you're just constantly adding value wherever you go, which is just so amazing and so rare sometimes, because it can be easy, especially with a remote workforce, right? It can be easy to kind of drift here and there, but like to show that you can, recognize, a critical need and add that value and step in and fix it and solve it. Like that's just so valuable. So kudos to you on taking that action. That's super awesome. Let's see. One question: was there a key moment for you when everything kind of clicked as a coder? Like for some people, it's a moment. For some, it's not. It's just a gradual increase. So I'm just curious what it was like for you.
I don't know. I don't know if there was a key moment. I think it's sort of gradual, but it's almost like a lot of key moments. I really liked in the beginning of the program how you kind of showed the journey is going to look like this. You're gonna go up. You're gonna plateau skill wise, but that's going to make you also feel up and feel then down. Right. I've seen quite a few memes that the one job where you feel like a genius and an idiot in the same day, right?
Yes.
So there's just a ton of those moments like, oh, now this makes sense. Oh, now that makes sense. I don't think there's ever one moment, right? Yeah. There's different moments for different aspects of programming, and you do have to be just a forever student, right? It's always going to change. Yeah. What we're doing now is way different than what I was doing when I started. And I'm sure in 10 years, it's going to look even more different. It might be higher level. It'll be all working with AIs or something. But
right. You never know. Well, that reminds me, how you spoke about how you started with C and then you went into Python. And, as an educator, I have debated with other educators of the merits of starting, C as a bottom-up approach, where you're basically almost starting an assembly and then working your way up from there so you can appreciate the higher level languages. Versus Python, which is what we've chosen in the Joy of Coding Academy to start with, because it's the closest language we have to English, and it is the easiest to get started and build cool things quickly. But again, there's like different philosophies on that, because what I have seen, because I have lived in universities that started students in C. In fact, I taught in one at the University of Delaware. And if you overheard students talking about this course, like I asked 2 freshmen on the bus one day, I was riding on the bus as a graduate student. I was like, oh, how do you guys like that new class? Starting learning to code in C. Are you interested in being, a CS major? And they'd be like, right. So it was just like, what happens, like, if you can hack it, if you enjoy it, bottom-up assembly to C is great. Some of the best programmers I know learn that way. But if that's not your cup of tea, you're more likely to see that and go the other way and go running away, kicking and screaming and never coming back. And so my mission is always to increase the diversity of thought that's in the space of programming computer science. So I pick the easy entry, right, where we get to dip our toe in and deepen as it makes sense for us. Because at the end of the day, these skills are employable at lots of different levels. I see there's a question about how beginners should get started. We'll definitely answer at the end, so stay tuned. We'll get to that. Love it. Thank you, Nick, for sharing. That was so good. For me, I did have a one key moment, but everybody is different. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say, I also think you put in the right guardrails. I like how you taught us the stack and the heap. I know that's a CPU level thing, but I was able to use Python to do it just by the restrictions that you put around how we can use the list and all of that. So kudos to you. All very, very well done. I think it's just enough to keep people challenged, but also to expose them to those lower level concepts that might be helpful to learn, because all abstractions leak. But in the day-to-day, you're going to be working mostly with higher level libraries anyway. So
Exactly. Right. It's about like the thought process, right? Like I can tell you that, early on when I was creating, the Joy of Coding Academy, there were some students that were really struggling with the data structures and algorithms portion, right? The big O and the stacks and the queues. And I allowed them to move forward. And then I learned why I'm never doing that ever again, right? Because even though the problems don't share any similarities whatsoever between web development, like full stack web development, and data structures and algorithms in Python, the mental process and skills that you develop are so key. And you can see it. And even though it's a transferable skill, even in a totally different tech landscape. And so, yeah, we have definitely seen that even though there's sometimes these gaps, right? Once you really mastered the problem solving aspect of it for yourself, right? You can really blow through that. So great observation. Thanks, Nick. So good. Yeah, so William, just to add on to that, said he took C++ years ago in college and went running away. Yep, I get it. I've been there too. I guess my first language was C++. No, actually BASIC. My first language was BASIC. I wrote like a horoscope program in middle school. Anyways. That's what's middle school you're gonna be thinking about. And I loved HyperCard. I didn't use, anyways. I could go all day long into like those old dinosaur technology. So good.
HyperCard was great. I never used it, but I've always seen the demos.
Yeah,
I do remember
exactly.
BASIC. I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. So good. But yeah, then I went to my first real like true language was C++. But the first language I felt comfortable coding was probably Perl, because I actually read the book by the authors. It's a good book when it's named by the animal on the cover. So the camel book. So loved that. And it just taught me so much about programming, to read from the author's perspective, like why they were intentional with a language design. And some of those same elements are in Python, which is nice to see. Just Perl's not really a widely used language. So I adapted my teaching to Python instead. Super awesome. Oh, and Nick, one of your team members, giving you a shout out here about what an awesome team lead you are. Again, totally. Like everybody knows in the academy that Nick is just stellar at managing the team. And also he did our starting architecture from the ground up and like adapted it to like, once, it wasn't just like a here, build this. It's really been a research infrastructure. So it's had some adaptability. And so Nick has been rocking it. So thank you, Nick.
Thanks,
North
Star. Appreciate that.
Appreciate it. Awesome. So cool. So Nick, again, there's a couple questions I'll get to at the end. No worries. If you guys have any questions for Nick too, please don't hesitate to drop them in there. But I just wanted to wrap up with one final question for Nick. Do you have any advice that you'd like to give your former self, or for any students, currently aspiring to become six-figure software developers? What could you tell them about their journey? What advice would you give them in moving forward?
Yeah, I think it is just be ready to always be a student. There's always going to be new things to learn. There's always going to be something that you don't understand, and just getting comfortable in that zone of kind of ambiguity. Like, hey, you're always going to have a new, problem. You're always going to have to figure out, okay, so what do I know? How does that map to this? How can I do research? Google Foo is very important. Nowadays, maybe even working with AIs, right, is kind of the next newest thing, but you got to know like when they're correct and when they're wrong, right? So there's always going to be something new that you can use, but it's almost always going to build on what you already know. So, but you do have to very much get comfortable with that. Hey, you're not going to know everything. There's always going to be something new. You're going to feel like, a lot of imposter syndrome, I think, continually. So just kind of get used to that. Keep putting in the work. It's just one step at a time. You can't always choose your speed, but you can choose your direction. So just try to stay focused, and don't be afraid to ask for help as well. And sometimes posting the wrong answer on Stack Overflow is the fastest way to get the right answer.
I love that. Oh my goodness. So good. I'm trying to take some notes on some of that awesomeness you're laying down. So good. All right, here, I'll get this last one out there. Don't be afraid to ask for help. So good, Nick. I love it. Yeah, always be learning. And I think, just Nick, to kind of like spin off what you're saying, like basically, I think what I hear you saying is how to be comfortable with not knowing and yet still having confidence in yourself. Right? Because at the end of the day, that is the superpower that I see in every professional software developer I know. They have a process. They have confidence in their ability to execute their process. So they don't have to know the answer because they know the process will get them to the answer. They'll find that direction they need. They don't know how long it will take, but they know they will get there, right? And would you agree, Nick, that that's what you see in yourself and some of those other professional developers you've worked with?
Yeah, totally. And it's not, it is a little bit arcane magic, but it's not, inaccessible. Somebody figured it out. So you have to have the confidence that you will eventually get there as well. But it is a lot of times going to be a rough road. So you do have to just kind of keep at it.
Yes, I love that. If someone else can figure it out, you can too. Super awesome. Super awesome. I love that. All right, cool. Thank you so much, Nick. Oh my goodness. So good to talk to you today. We do have a couple other questions, so I want to make sure we'll answer those. And so that's super good. So we did have one comment that Pearl is awesome. Pearl is sick, which is great. I know. I do love Pearl. Funny story. So my mom was a project manager for, how we used to have, now we've got like 5G and LTE on our phones. Do you guys remember 3G? So my mom was on the team working for, Bell Labs that was building out 1G, 2G, and 3G. And so she'd come home with these like horror stories of software development where like there was this guy that wanted to like roll out the latest changes to the cell phone network. And he used Perl. He learned it for fun to do it. And he forgot a semicolon. And what happened is like the entire network for Philadelphia went down. It's like, what misplaced semicolon? Or like, here's another like just real world development story. Like, oh my goodness. So Washington, D.C.'s network, they couldn't figure out what was going on. This whole cell network was going down. It was Sunday around 1 o'clock. Do you guys know what happens in the fall, Sundays around 1 o'clock?
Football?
Sunday football, right? Sunday football. So what they hadn't programmed in is that every cell phone in that stadium was pinging the cell towers non-stop and just got overwhelmed. It was like a denial of service attack from their own users during the normal course of like living their lives. And so, that's how they learned, oh, we can't have them constantly pinging. We have to turn that feature down. Anyway, so like, yes, so partly why I'm here in this line of work is also because I was getting these stories like at the dinner table. I'm like, okay, we can do better. We can make this work. So anyways, super, super awesome. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So, so good. All right, let's see what we have. Oh, here we have another general question from Rick. How many nested loops are too many? So I think I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this, Nick. I'll just hop in and I think it's going to be dependent on the problem. Right? Because it's about how much data you're pumping through those loops, right? So Nick, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, this is where Big O came in super helpful because now you don't need to know the specific algorithm, right? You just need to know like what is the runtime. And like you said, then you multiply that by the volume of data, right? So each time you run through it, you're exponentially growing, right? If you're looping through the whole thing. Right. So every time you loop through, so if you have a small data set, that's fine if it fits you in memory, right? If not, then it will you'll end up with either running out of memory, basically. So it 100% depends on the problem, and there's always going to be cold golf. There's always going to be a way to make it cleaner, more efficient. But at the end of the day, you just need to solve the problem that's in front of you because there will always be another problem right behind that. So you also don't want to over optimize. If you've got a solution that works with a few nested loops, great, use it. If you hit the point where, you might want to make a note in your head, like if the scale hits a certain point, I need to revisit this code. But totally depends on the problem.
Exactly. I know, which is like, so Rick, again, more context is always good, but just to, add to what Nick was saying, like just to give you some examples, like I once knew a woman who was a professor who was doing research and she would just sit down and brute force her solutions. And if it took all weekend, it didn't matter because she only had to run it once. And so unless it was going to take longer than a weekend, because she could just turn on Friday, come back on Monday morning, have her answer, it wasn't worth the time to make that code faster because she wasn't going to keep doing it every single week. And even if she was, she could do it every weekend. That worked for her, right? Versus like this is a production system that Amazon is relying on. They're going to run like 10,000 times a day. Like, oh my goodness, no. We need to trim this back. And it's going to be having millions of data points going through it like 10,000 times a day, right? No. You are going to rewrite that within an inch of your life. Right. So it's all about the scale and the use, like there's actually and this is why ChatGPT is not replacing us, folks, right? Because there's too much context that has to come into that to really make it obvious. Like for instance, what if your loops are running over a data set that's never changing in size and it's only 10 things? Use as many loops as you want, right? It's probably not going to matter. And it's also relative to the problem. And like, do we as humans know a better way? So for instance, if you are going to sort a list, or if you're going to search a list of numbers for one number, you should only need one loop for that. You'd only need a second loop if you're sorting it. So for instance, if you're searching for the occurrence of one thing and you're in 3 nested loops, okay, you've done that inefficiently, right? Like, so there's also, and this is where that big O of the data structures and algorithms knowledge comes in, because it's relative to what do we as humans know how solvable this is. Like, does it require 3 loops just to, look for the letter F in this string? Like, probably not. So yeah, I guess, Rick, it depends is the answer, but hopefully we've given you some guidelines on like on how you might go about doing that. Super awesome. Thanks, Nick. That was great. And Indian is asking a question. Oh yeah, sure.
I was going to say that does also, though, hit the point where you might want to break things also into other functions just for readability, because sometimes it's hard to keep track of in your head. So sometimes just from that aspect, it might still be nested loops, but at least kind of break it up in your code into separate functions. Sometimes you can decompose it a bit.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, Rick, the answer is it depends. And that's always what I say. It's not use this or that, it's when, right? Like for me, like for instance, the classic example is the software development lifecycle, software development process. Is it waterfall or agile? And for me, it's never this or that. It's when waterfall, when agile. And that's what really differentiates the professional software developer who's capable of earning 6 figures from someone who's just getting started, is they have that discernment. And even if they don't know the answer for this particular problem, they know enough to try it and learn from it, and then they can generalize later. Or seek someone who's experienced it before them, right, and ask for their advice. So for instance, one of our coaches on staff is an AI researcher who's worked in industry for 20 years. Now, I've done AI research as part of my PhD, and I asked him a question. I was like, well, isn't it normally like this? He's like, yeah, sometimes, but sometimes it's like this, right? So like I had one data point and I could generalize from it, but not as well as someone who's been doing it for 20 years. They can give you all this discernment. So like how, Nick spoke about not being afraid to ask questions, like being able to have access to people who have that kind of experience. I mean, imagine doing this research on Google for days and days and days, or spending years to acquire this knowledge, or you could just show up live to a Zoom and ask somebody in 2 minutes and they can just tell you, right? Like that is part of the power of what we give our students access to, and what, Nick has been so fortunate to be involved in. We're just so happy to have you here. Let's see, I had one other question in there. Super awesome. All right, cool. Let me scroll back. Okay, cool. So one last question. As a beginner, how to start coding? Great question in the end. And if anyone else is having, in the audience is having this question, we actually have a brand new program just for beginners to help you get started. For those that are interested in the Joy of Coding Academy and joining us with our guaranteed internship program and our job offer guarantee, we have a starter program that actually allows you to extend your time so you can really hit the ground running when you join the academy and get to that internship and your offer faster by giving you a lower cost option to get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post this, a link in the chat. If you want, Indian, check it out. We're running a special this week. It's like $60 a month. This is the last week. So if you're watching this replay, you may get to the website and it's increased a little bit because we're actually adding even more support, even more job hunt support to this option for people. So yeah, we really want to do everything we can to help you move forward. But if you're really serious about getting a tech job, right? Like Nick is really eye on the prize, like 6-figure software developer, here he comes. If that's the type of position you want, the best pathway forward is to join us inside the Joy of Coding Academy with our guaranteed internship. And we can also offer a job offer guarantee with that, which, we just love supporting our students for that. Super awesome. Okay, awesome. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Rick. So glad to do that. Awesome. Super awesome. Great questions today, guys. Nick, is there anything else you'd like to share before we sign off today?
No, I think we pretty well covered everything. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Nick. Oh, it's been such a privilege and an honor to have you inside the Academy. And if you know anyone that's looking for a killer team player that can actually walk the line between talking to people and talking to tech, Nick is on the market ready for his next opportunity. And so if you know anybody, let us know. All right. Have a great rest of your day, guys. Take care.